I should have felt the happiest on that day. The day I wore the white dress I dreamed of since childhood. The day I was supposed to walk toward love, security, and the future I thought I deserved. But instead, standing at the altar, surrounded by smiling faces, I felt a strange chill crawl down my spine. Because that was the day I discovered the man waiting for me, the man who had sworn to protect me for life, wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't just my groom. He was my father. My name is Emily. I'm 25 years old. For as long as I can remember, it's just been me and my mother against the world. She never talked about my father. Every time I asked, she would shake her head, eyes clouded with sadness, and change the subject. I grew up with that empty space in my life, but I filled it with dreams. I told myself it didn't matter. My mother worked hard, gave me everything she could, and I promised myself that one day I'd build the kind of family we never had. When I met Daniel, I thought that promise had finally come true. He was older than me, 15 years older, but he carried himself with a confidence, a strength that made me feel safe. He wasn't just charming, he was attentive. He remembered the smallest details about me, the things even my closest friends overlooked. He'd bring me coffee the way I liked it without me asking. He would squeeze my hand when I grew anxious in crowded rooms. He looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. Our relationship grew quickly, maybe too quickly. My mother never liked him. Every time I brought him around, she grew pale, her hands trembling slightly, as if she were holding something inside. Once, she even pulled me aside and whispered, "Emily, please don't rush this." But when I pressed her, she refused to explain. She only shook her head and muttered, "Some things are better left in the past." I thought she was just being overprotective. After all, she had raised me alone. Maybe she didn't want to let me go. Maybe she was jealous of how much I leaned on him instead of her. I brushed off her warnings. I told myself I was an adult, capable of making my own choices. And Daniel loved me. I could see it in the way his eyes softened when they met mine. I could hear it in his voice when he promised he'd never leave me. But in the weeks leading up to the wedding, I began to notice small things, tiny cracks in the perfect picture. Daniel would get quiet when I asked about his family. He never introduced me to his parents, his siblings, anyone from his past. He claimed they were estranged, that he'd cut ties years ago, and that he didn't want to burden me with their drama. At first, I accepted that. But then there were the moments where his eyes would linger on me, too long, like he was searching my face for something more than just love. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. My heart was racing, and I couldn't explain why. I told myself it was nerves, the natural fear of stepping into a lifelong commitment. But deep down, something felt off. I remember sitting at the vanity, staring at myself in the mirror and whispering, "Am I making a mistake?" And then the morning came. The church was filled with roses and soft music. My friends laughed and teased as they helped me into my dress. My mother stood in the corner, silent, her face as pale as a ghost. I thought she was just emotional. I thought she was simply overwhelmed at seeing her only daughter become a bride. But when I stepped into the aisle, when my eyes locked on Daniel waiting at the altar, a wave of nausea hit me so hard I nearly stumbled. His smile was wide, but his hands trembled. His jaw tightened as if he were holding back words he couldn't say. And then I saw it, the look my mother gave him. Not anger, not disapproval, but recognition. In that instant, a piece of the puzzle snapped into place, though I couldn't yet see the whole picture. My pulse quickened, my palms went cold, and as I took his hand, I noticed how tightly he squeezed, almost as if he would run. And then, just as the priest began to speak, a voice broke through the crowd. "Emily, stop!" It was my mother. Her voice was sharp, trembling, desperate. The entire room gasped as she stepped forward, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. Daniel's grip on me tightened even more, and in that moment, I realized the truth was about to shatter everything. The silence in the church was suffocating. I could hear nothing but the sound of my mother's sobs and the pounding of my own heart against my chest. My friends looked around in confusion, whispering nervously, while Daniel's hand gripped mine so tightly it hurt. He leaned down, close to my ear, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't listen to her. Just keep going." But how could I? My mother's voice had torn through the air like a warning shot, and I couldn't ignore the terror in her eyes. She stepped closer, her heels echoing against the marble floor, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Emily, you can't marry him. Please, you don't understand." My lips parted, but no words came out. I turned to Daniel, desperate for some kind of explanation, but he avoided my gaze. His smile had vanished. His eyes were glassy, hard, like a man backed into a corner. The priest stammered, unsure whether to continue, and for a moment, I thought the entire ceremony might collapse right there. But Daniel recovered quickly. He forced a laugh, shaking his head, and said to the room, "I'm sorry, everyone. Nerves. Cold feet. Happens to the best of us, right?" His words were meant to calm the crowd, but his tone was too sharp, too defensive. My mother's face twisted with anguish. She clutched her chest and whispered again, "Emily, please, he's not who you think he is." The guests began murmuring, glancing between us, waiting for me to react. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth right there in front of everyone, but my body wouldn't move. I was trapped between the man I thought I loved and the woman who had never lied to me, not once in my life. That night, after the chaos, after Daniel managed to steer the ceremony forward despite my mother's collapse, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The ring on my finger felt like ice, heavy and suffocating. I kept hearing my mother's voice echoing in my head. "He's not who you think he is." I wanted answers. I needed them. But every time I turned to Daniel, every time I asked him about my mother's words, he brushed it off. "She's unstable," he said. "She doesn't want you to be happy. She's clinging to you because she knows she's losing you." His voice was calm, almost soothing, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted away too quickly, avoiding mine, as if he were afraid I could see right through him. That's when the doubt began to grow. Little things that I had ignored before now gnawed at me. His reluctance to talk about his past, his constant avoidance of family introductions, the way he seemed almost too interested in my childhood stories, asking the same questions again and again, as though he were piecing something together. I started noticing his habits more sharply. He was always on his phone, screen turned down when I walked into the room. He would step outside to take calls late at night, his voice hushed, urgent. When I asked who it was, he'd smile and say, "Work, nothing important." But it was important. I could feel it in my bones. Our intimacy began to suffer. He still touched me, still kissed me, but it felt different. His hands lingered too long, not with passion, but with something I couldn't quite name. I started pulling away without realizing it, making excuses, avoiding eye contact. And each time I did, I saw the flicker of panic flash across his face. Then came the first real crack. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I casually mentioned how much I missed knowing about my father. I told him I often wondered what he looked like, what kind of man he had been. For a moment, Daniel froze. His glass of wine hovered in the air, untouched, and his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitch. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Maybe it's better you don't know. Some things are better left buried." I laughed nervously, brushing it off as a strange comment, but deep down, it rattled me. Why would he say that? Why would he care? That night, I couldn't stop myself. While he slept beside me, I reached for his phone. My hands shook as I typed in the passcode, and when the screen lit up, I felt like a criminal invading his privacy. But what I found made my stomach twist. Dozens of missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. Messages deleted, entire threads wiped clean. The only thing left were fragments, half sentences in his notes app, reminders that didn't make sense. "Don't tell her. She can't know. The timing isn't right." My breath caught in my throat. What was he hiding? Why was he hiding it from me? I wanted to wake him up, shake him until he confessed, but fear kept me still. Fear that if I asked the question, I already knew the answer. The next morning, I confronted him gently, testing the waters. "Daniel, who keeps calling you at night? Why are there no messages on your phone?" He laughed too quickly, brushing it off. "Spam calls. I delete everything, so you don't worry." He kissed my forehead, but his lips were cold, and I could feel the lie beneath them. And that's when the distance between us truly began. He was in the same room, yet it felt like he was miles away. I stopped trusting his smile. I stopped believing his reassurances. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger, and the walls of my marriage were closing in on me. But then, one evening, I picked up a call from that unknown number, and the voice on the other end changed everything. The voice on the other end of the line was male, deep, urgent, trembling. At first, I thought it was a wrong number, but then he said my name. "Emily, you don't know me, but you need to listen. He's lying to you. Daniel isn't who he says he is." I froze, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. My eyes darted to Daniel, asleep in the next room, his chest rising and falling steadily. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I can't say yet," the man replied, his voice cracking. "It's not safe, but you need to be careful. He's hiding something about your family. If you stay with him, you'll regret it." Before I could demand more, the line went dead. I sat there, shaking, staring at the black screen. My pulse thundered in my ears. Who was that man? How did he know me? And what did he mean about my family? The next morning, Daniel was all warmth and charm, brewing coffee, kissing my cheek, acting like nothing was wrong. But every touch of his hand felt heavy now, like a chain. His casual smile seemed like a mask. "Bad dreams?" he asked, tilting his head as I stared into my untouched cup. "Something like that," I muttered. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone at him and demand answers, but fear kept my mouth shut. Instead, I studied him. The way he avoided eye contact, the way his fingers drummed against the counter when he thought I wasn't looking. Later that week, I began digging. I searched through old documents, receipts, anything I could find that tied him to his past. But the more I looked, the more I realized how little I actually knew about him. There were no family photos, no stories of childhood, no traces of parents, siblings, or relatives, just a blank canvas where a life should have been. Whenever I asked, he grew cold. "Why does it matter?" he'd snap. "I'm here now. Isn't that enough?" But it wasn't. Not anymore. One night, while he was in the shower, I slipped into his study. I had never snooped there before. He kept the door locked, and I never had the courage. But that night, it was slightly ajar. Inside, the room smelled of stale paper and something metallic. His desk was cluttered with files, loose papers, and scraps covered in notes. My hands shook as I rifled through them, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he would hear it over the running water. And then I found it. A small photograph, old and faded. A man and a woman. My parents. I recognized my mother instantly.
younger, smiling brightly. But beside her stood my father, the man I had never known. And next to them, a child, a boy, his hair dark, his expression solemn. The boy was Daniel. I dropped the photo, my breath hitching in my throat, my chest constricted, and the world tilted violently beneath me. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't. My knees nearly gave out as I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of books. The crash echoed through the house, and within seconds, Daniel was there, dripping wet from the shower, a towel clinging to his waist. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was sharp, demanding, his eyes narrowing like a predator cornering prey.
I pointed at the photo, my hands trembling. "What is this, Daniel? Why are you in this picture? Why are you with my parents?" His jaw clenched. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and picked up the photo. His fingers brushed over it like it was fragile, precious. "Emily," his voice was low, almost gentle. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." My stomach churned. "Tell me what?" He looked up then, and his eyes were cold, distant, stripped of the charm he always wore. "That your father was my father too." The words sliced through me like a blade. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and the room began to spin. I staggered backward, clutching the wall for balance. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not possible." But deep down, in the hollow pit of my stomach, I knew it was true. The missing pieces, the secrecy, my mother's desperate warnings. It all made sense now. Daniel reached for me, but I recoiled, my entire body shaking. "Get away from me!" His expression darkened, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Emily, you don't understand. This doesn't change how I feel about you. I love you. I've always loved you. That's all that matters." My blood turned to ice. His words weren't comforting. They were terrifying. "This changes everything," I choked out. "Everything." But he didn't let go. His grip tightened, his voice trembling now with something raw and dangerous. "No, it doesn't. You're mine, Emily. You've always been mine, and I'm not going to lose you. Not now, not ever." I don't remember how long I stood there in the study, my back pressed against the wall, Daniel's words echoing in my skull like a gunshot. Your father was my father too. The air was suffocating, thick with a silence that screamed louder than anything I'd ever heard. I wanted to run, to claw my way out of that house, out of that marriage, out of the nightmare that was swallowing me whole. But my legs wouldn't move. He was still staring at me, eyes dark, unreadable, clutching that faded photograph like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel wasn't charming. He wasn't handsome or safe or mine. He was a stranger. No, worse. He was my blood. When my voice finally returned, it came out strangled, broken. You knew this whole time." Daniel's jaw tightened. I suspected. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then the more I looked at you, the more I knew. I felt my insides twist. "And you still married me? You let me stand at that altar. You let me say those vows. You touched me?" My voice cracked, the weight of disgust and betrayal collapsing on me all at once.
"I love you, Emily," he shouted, the words tearing out of him like a confession and a curse all at once. His eyes burned with something I couldn't recognize, something between desperation and madness. "I don't care about bloodlines. I don't care about rules. You're mine. Do you understand? You were always meant to be mine." I shook my head violently, my tears blurring him into something monstrous. "This isn't love, Daniel. This is sick. This is wrong." He slammed his hand against the desk, the sound so sharp I flinched. Paper scattered, the photo fluttering to the floor. His chest heaved as he glared at me, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then he softened, almost pleading. "Emily, please, you can't leave me. We've already built a life together. Nobody has to know. We can keep this between us. Just us." The way he said it, the casual way he wanted to bury this horror and live with it, made bile rise in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. That night, I lay awake in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, my body stiff as stone. His arm draped over me felt like a shackle, and every brush of his breath against my neck sent shivers of fear down my spine. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I dreamed of my mother, her face pale, her eyes filled with sorrow. In the dream, she whispered the same words she had spoken to me before the wedding. "You don't know who he really is." When morning came, I couldn't look at him. I dressed quietly, my hands trembling, and slipped outside, desperate for air. But the weight followed me, pressing down, crushing me from the inside. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed answers. I needed confirmation. I drove to my mother's house, my hands clenching the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. She opened the door, surprise flashing in her tired eyes. "Emily," she murmured, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" I didn't waste a second. I pulled the photograph from my bag and shoved it at her. "Tell me the truth, now. Who is he? Who is Daniel?" Her face drained of color. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her body swaying like she might collapse. "Where did you get this?" "Don't you dare dodge me!" I cried, my voice breaking. "You've been hiding something from me my whole life, haven't you? You knew who he was, and you let me marry him." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head violently. "I tried to stop you. I begged you not to marry him, but you wouldn't listen. You said I was jealous, controlling. I didn't know how to tell you without destroying you." "Destroying me?" My voice was a shrill echo, trembling on the edge of hysteria. "Do you know what you've done? I married my own brother, Mom. My brother." Her sobs broke the room in half, her body crumpling to the floor. "He's not just your brother," she whispered. "He's your father's son. Your blood. I staggered backward, my stomach lurching, my breath ragged. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around my neck. Half-brother. Same father. Same blood. The truth wasn't just unbearable. It was a poison, seeping through every part of me. My skin burned with shame, my veins iced with terror. I had stood at the altar and vowed myself to him. I had kissed him. I had shared a bed with him. My life was over. I collapsed onto the couch, my body convulsing with sobs, the photograph slipping from my hand to the floor. My mother reached for me, but I pushed her away. "You let this happen," I spat. "You let me walk into hell blindfolded." The fury in my voice shocked even me, but it was the only thing holding me together, because if I let go of the rage, I would crumble completely. That night, when I returned home, Daniel was waiting.
He stood in the doorway, like he'd been there for hours, his eyes hollow, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "You went to her," he said flatly. My heart stopped. "She told you, didn't she?" His lips curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. I knew she would. She never wanted us to be happy. I couldn't look at him. I pushed past, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. "Emily," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare turn against me. You and I, we're bound. No one can tear us apart. Not her, not anyone." The way he said it chilled me to the bone. I realized then that I wasn't just trapped in a marriage. I was trapped with a man who believed fate itself had tied me to him, and he wasn't going to let me go. The days that followed were a blur of dread and suffocation. Every time I looked at Daniel, I saw both the man I thought I loved and the monster I now knew he was. His touch repulsed me, his smile sickened me, yet I couldn't escape. His presence filled the house like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I started noticing how closely he watched me. He seemed to sense the shift in me, the distance I was putting between us. If I lingered too long on my phone, his eyes would dart over. If I left the room for too long, he'd call after me, his voice laced with suspicion. I felt hunted in my own home. But then, one night, fate handed me something I wasn't expecting. Daniel had gone to shower, leaving his phone charging on the nightstand. I never thought I'd dare touch it. He was paranoid about his privacy. But something in me snapped. My hands moved on their own, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The screen lit up with a notification, a message from an unknown number. "She still doesn't know? You're playing with fire, Daniel." I froze. My breath hitched. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I scrolled, shaking, reading the thread of messages between him and someone I didn't recognize. They talked about me. They talked about her, hiding it from me all these years. They talked about how long Daniel had known, about how my mother had tried to warn me, about how he hadn't cared because in his twisted mind, I was meant for him. One message made me drop the phone like it had burned me. "She's your sister, Daniel. End it before it destroys everything." Sister. The words screamed inside my skull, over and over, ripping apart every fragile wall I'd tried to build around myself. I stumbled back, my chest heaving, when I heard the bathroom door creak open. Daniel stepped out, towel around his waist, his eyes locking on the phone lying a little too far from where he'd left it. His expression shifted instantly, calm to cold, charming to venomous. "You went through my phone," he said, voice flat, dangerous. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. My body trembled as the words burst out of me. "How could you? How could you let me marry you, sleep beside you, love you, when you knew the truth?" His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but instead, he smiled, slow, chilling, deliberate. "Because you belong to me," he whispered. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't keep this secret locked inside anymore. If I stayed silent, it would consume me whole. The very next day, I drove to my mother's house again. But this time, I wasn't alone. My aunt was there, and my cousin, both of them sipping tea in the living room. I didn't care. I needed them to hear. I dropped the phone on the table, pulled up the messages, and screamed, "Look at what he's been hiding! Look at what you all kept from me!" Their eyes widened,
My mother gasped. My cousin covered her mouth in shock. The room erupted into chaos, voices shouting, questions flying. But I didn't stop. I let it all spill out. The photograph, the confession, the obsession. Every detail that had been clawing at my soul came out like blood from an open wound. And then, like the devil himself had been summoned, Daniel walked in. He had followed me. The room went silent as he stepped across the threshold, his eyes scanning every face. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look guilty. He looked proud. "Say what you want," he said coldly, "but nothing changes the truth. Emily and I are bound. No one can undo what's been done." The air snapped like lightning. My aunt gasped, my cousin whispered, "Oh my God," and my mother collapsed into her chair, shaking. That was when the shouting began. My family hurled accusations, calling him a monster, calling me a victim, calling the whole situation an abomination. Daniel shouted back, defending himself, claiming love was love, that blood didn't matter. His words echoed like poison through the room. And then came the breaking point. My cousin, her hands trembling, pulled out her phone and screamed, "Everyone needs to know the truth. The world needs to see what he's done." Before I could stop her, she was recording. Daniel lunged, trying to grab the phone, but my uncle, who had arrived mid-chaos, stepped in, holding him back. The living room exploded into a scene I can barely describe. Screaming, crying, shoving, the sound of my mother wailing like a wounded animal. And in the center of it all, I stood frozen, watching as my entire life shattered under the weight of the truth. Neighbors came. The shouting spilled into the street. People gathered, whispering, staring. Some filmed, some gasped. And Daniel, my husband, my brother, stood in the middle of it, his face twisted with fury, his eyes burning into mine like I had betrayed him. The humiliation was unbearable. The shame so thick I could barely breathe. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The fear cracked, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. I turned to him, my voice trembling but louder than I thought possible. "We're done, Daniel. Whatever this was, it's over. You will never own me. You will never control me again." The words sliced through the chaos, silencing everything for a heartbeat. His face contorted, rage spilling from him in waves. He shouted my name, cursed me, swore I would regret this. But it didn't matter anymore. The secret was out. The world knew, and there was no going back. That night, I didn't return to our home. I stayed with my mother, curled up on her couch, staring at the ceiling as the truth pressed down like a weight I would never escape. But beneath the despair, something else flickered. A spark, a promise. If Daniel had thought he could trap me forever in his twisted illusion, he was wrong. Because now, the whole world knew. And this time, I was the one who would decide what happened next. The morning after the explosion at my mother's house, the world felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but changed. Something irreversible had happened. The secret that had once suffocated me in silence now hung in the open air for everyone to see. By noon, the video my cousin had taken spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Phones buzzed, whispers grew, and within hours, my shame had become gossip in every corner of town. But the strangest thing was, instead of feeling destroyed by it, I felt liberated. I no longer had to carry this weight alone. Daniel, however, didn't share that relief. By the second day, his office called. Someone had forwarded the video. His boss demanded answers. By the third day, he was suspended, pending internal review. By the end of the week, his career, the one thing he valued almost as much as control, crumbled before his eyes. And still, he tried to reach me. Phone calls, messages, even pounding at my mother's door late at night. He begged, threatened, pleaded, sometimes all in the same breath. "You don't understand, Emily. We're meant to be. Then, if you ruin me, I'll ruin you." His voice grew hoarse with desperation, but each time I refused to let him in. My mother, though broken and guilt-ridden, stood like a shield between us. "You will never step foot in this house again," she told him once, her voice shaking but firm. "You've done enough damage." His family, once silent shadows, finally stepped forward too. His sister called me, sobbing, saying she had begged him to stop years ago, that she warned him this obsession would destroy him. His own parents disowned him publicly, unable to bear the shame of what he had done. For the first time, Daniel stood alone, stripped of allies, stripped of respect. And me? I filed for annulment. The legal battle was brutal, but I walked into that courtroom every day with my head held higher than I ever thought possible. My lawyer argued the truth with undeniable evidence. The DNA tests, the messages, the video. The judge's face hardened with each passing detail. By the time the gavel struck, my marriage was not just voided, it was condemned. The humiliation Daniel tried to bury me in now clung to him like a curse. The whispers followed him through grocery stores, not me. The pointed fingers aimed at him, not me. And while I still carried scars that burned in the quiet of night, I also carried something he could never take from me again: freedom. But karma wasn't finished with Daniel. Not long after the annulment, I learned his lover, yes, there had been others, because predators rarely settle for just one victim, had abandoned him. His friends cut ties. His finances crumbled under legal fees and the loss of his job. When I saw him once in passing, standing outside a liquor store with hollow eyes and shaking hands, I barely recognized him. He looked smaller, weaker, as if the weight of his sins had finally devoured him from the inside out. And yet, even in that moment, he glared at me with the same venom, the same sense of betrayal, as though I had destroyed him. It almost made me laugh, because for once, it was clear. He hadn't lost because of me. He lost because of himself. That night, I went home, stood in front of the mirror, and really looked at myself for the first time in months. My face was tired, yes, and my eyes still carried shadows, but there was something else there too: strength, survival. I whispered aloud, just to hear the words, "You are not his victim anymore." And in that moment, I believed it. The weeks that followed became a slow rebirth. I enrolled in classes I had once abandoned. I got a job I actually enjoyed. For the first time in years, I woke up without dread sitting on my chest. Every step away from Daniel felt like stitching back together the pieces of myself he had tried to rip apart. But life, as always, doesn't let you leave with one final reminder. One night, weeks later, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was Daniel. His voice was weak, almost unrecognizable. "Emily," he rasped, "please, I need you." For a moment, I froze. That old pull of fear, of guilt, tried to creep in. But then I remembered everything. The lies, the control, the betrayal. And I remembered the look in his eyes when he swore I belonged to him. I hung up. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. As I set the phone down, I realized something. Karma wasn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it was quieter. A slow unraveling. A mirror that forced a monster to finally face himself. And I, at last, was free to face the world without him. It has been 5 years since Daniel's shadow darkened my life. 5 years since the night I hung up on his final call. I never heard from him again, and truth be told, I don't need to know what became of him. Whether he vanished into the abyss of his own mistakes or continues to haunt himself in silence, it no longer belongs to me. That chapter of my life is over. But scars remain. Not the kind people can see, though some nights I still trace the faint line where my wedding ring once sat, as if it burned itself into my skin. The real scars live deeper, etched in the way I hesitate before trusting, the way I sometimes flinch when someone raises their voice, the way family dinners still carry a ghost of tension. And yet, I am stronger than I ever imagined. I rebuilt. Slowly, painfully, stubbornly, I rebuilt. I found a career I love, one where I help people find their voices, because I know what it feels like to have yours stolen. I travel when I can. I laugh louder than I used to. I've even learned to love again, though cautiously, carefully. My mother, she never forgave herself fully. I don't think she ever will. But over the years, she has shown me in countless quiet ways that love can be flawed and broken, yet still real. She is healing, just as I am. And here's the truth I've carried with me. Monsters don't always come in masks or shadows. Sometimes they come smiling. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table. Sometimes they swear they love you while tying chains around your soul. But chains can break. I broke mine. And if there's one message I want anyone listening to take from my story, it's this: you are not powerless. Even when it feels like the walls are closing in, even when silence feels safer than the truth, your voice matters. Speaking out might shatter everything, yes.
But sometimes things need to shatter so you can finally see the pieces for what they are. As for Daniel, his name no longer holds power over me. He is not my story's ending. I am. Because survival isn't just about escaping the fire. It's about learning how to stand tall in the ashes, rebuild, and know deep down that the flames never defined you. So if you've ever felt trapped, if you've ever been told you are less, if someone has tried to own your life, your choices, your body, remember this: you can walk away. And when you do, you will discover something terrifyingly beautiful: the freedom to finally live as yourself. This is my truth. This is my survival. And this is the end of his story.